incredible star knowledge. In a 1994 book, The Orion Mystery, Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert claimed that the shafts of the Great Pyramid were pointed directly at key stars in the constellation Orion in a way that reflected the configuration of Orion in ancient times. Orion is the great hunter of the night sky, and the three belt stars of Orion are easily recognized by nearly everyone living on this planet. But what's Orion's story? Using astronomical data about stellar movement, Bauval and Gilbert contended that the Orion stars correspond precisely to the pyramid's position in approximately 10,400 BC. This period was called by the Egyptians the first time when the god Osiris ruled the earth. According to Bauval, the positions of the Giza pyramids on the ground are a reflection of the positions of the stars in Orion. In Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock draws attention to the fact that the entire Giza Plateau and the Nile River were representations of the constellation of Orion and the Milky Way, respectively. It seems that after the flood and their expulsion from the earth, the Nephilim left the Sphinx, pyramids, and Nile River as markers indicating their whereabouts in the heavens. Building on Bauval and Hancock in his book, The Orion Zone, researcher Gary David takes us to Arizona and shows that the constellation of Orion was projected upon the deserts there, too. Orion provides the template, he says, by which the Anasazi, the ancestral Hopi, determined the locations of their villages and sacred sites during a migration period across the southwest of the U.S. that lasted centuries. Spiritually mandated by a god the Hopi called Massa, this earthly Orion closely mirrors its celestial counterpart, with prehistoric cities corresponding to all the major stars in the constellation. Gary's also going to discuss with us the possibility of extraterrestrial contact among the Hopi. Gary, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you, William.
It's a real pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. I know you don't do very many interviews and that you're very conscientious of the Hopi and sensitive to their religious beliefs. So, once again, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
You've embarked on an astounding project, I think, to map the stars on the ground in Arizona. How does an English professor from the Dakotas suddenly find himself in Arizona decoding ancient rock art?
Well, I've been living in Arizona for about 12 years. Before that time, as you said, I lived in South Dakota and studied the Lakota Sioux and studied their rituals and cosmology, and also participated in some sweat lodges and witnessed the sun dance up there. And I also taught English on the Pine Ridge Reservation. But it was time to move after about 15 years in the Dakotas. And I became fascinated with the Southwest during a trip down this way. And I just got involved with going to ruin sites and just seeing how different the Hopi and the Anasazi, or the Hizatsunom, as the Hopi like to call them, the ancient ones, how different they are from the Lakota, the more nomadic tribes of the plains. And I started going to different ruin sites and going up to the Hopi reservation and going to Kachina dances. The Kachina dances are held annually from about late April until just after the summer solstice. In July, the Kachina season finishes. And I started going to a number of these dances and witnessing the dances. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. They're so hard to describe because there's so many variations of the Kachinas. The Kachinas are basically spirit messengers. They're not gods per se, but they're intercessors between humans and the gods. And the Hopi have dances to honor these Kachinas, and they wear different sorts of masks and varying types. They're round masks, and some are cylindrical, and there are different feathers, and And
they almost look like robots, or like they're wearing some kind of a spacesuit or something. Not
yeah,
to diminish
they do look like helmets. Some of the masks are especially the cylindrical masks. They look like some sort of helmet. There's no other way to put it. There are kachinas that are more naturalistic, such as like the wolf kachina or the owl kachina, or and so forth. But then you have these bizarre creatures that you really can't describe, and they put on these dances, and they dance all day long in the middle of the plaza, the village plaza, and there might be 25 or maybe 50 dancers, and they dance all day long in the desert sun, and it's kind of an endurance test, really, and honoring these spirit messengers.
And so you're watching this. Sometimes you're out in the middle of the day. Other times at night. It's mesmerizing. You're watching Orion rise after sunset, and you're just kind of being taken into this incredible world of the Hopi. At what point did you then make the connection between what the Hopi are saying in some of their traditions and what Bauval and Hancock and also Adrian Gilbert had dug up in Egypt?
Well, I was driving up to the Hopi mesas. I live about 4 hours from them. And as you say, I had just read the Orion Mystery. This was back in 1997. And I was gazing up towards the three primary mesas that the Hopi have settled on. They're first, second, and third mesas, they call them, and they're fairly large mesas. They're not small buttes or anything. They're large promontories, and the Hopi settled upon these mesas about 1100 A.D. That's when most archaeologists believe that the villages began to take shape up on the mesas, on top of the mesas, and also at the base of the mesas. Now, the mesas are laid out from east to west, and they're about 7 miles apart, and in a row. And as I said, I had just finished reading the Orion Mystery, and I thought, well, these three mesas right in a row. Maybe there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And so I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And later on, when I got home, I got out my sky chart and got out my map and compared the two. And I found that there was either a Hopi village or a Hopi ruin corresponding to every major star in the constellation Orion. So, and the
map you have in your book is utterly compelling, Gary, where you lay out the Anasazi star cities, as you refer to them, side by side beside Orion. And you're right, it is virtually a perfect match, where the Hopi mesas and the sites of their sacred sites are mirroring Orion on the ground.
And it's just uncanny in the perfection of the reflection of sky mirroring the Earth. Earth mirroring as above, so below. I was just floored by that.
And you mentioned one of the things that you discovered is that there was an instructor or a mediator or perhaps an overseer who was assisting the Hopi in the creation of this layout. This is I'm referring to the Hopi god, the Hopi instructor Massa. Let's talk for a moment about who Massa was to the Hopi and how he influenced this story.
Masao is a very important god for the Hopi. He's also represented as a Kachina, but he's basically a god. He's the god of the underworld, death, and this earth plane. So he kind of is similar to Osiris in Egypt. He plays a similar role as being god of the underworld. The Hopi have a cosmology that is rather similar to the Egyptian one, in that they have an active relationship with the underworld. For instance, when people are doing the winter solstice ceremony on the Earth, the spirits in the underworld are doing the summer solstice ceremony, and so there's a reciprocity there that is really kind of unique, I think. But it is similar to the Egyptians too. Their concept of the duwat or the tuwat.
Mm-hmm.
But
Gary,
Masao,
we're going to catch a quick break right now, Gary. When we come back, we'll return to our conversation about Masao, and then let's also talk about the connection with literal beings from Orion, both in ancient Egypt and in Arizona. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
And this is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking in just a few minutes with Gary for our subscribers, and we are going to be talking about what the Hopi are saying and believe about the coming times and the coming Earth changes. His website is a wonderful website, the Orion Zone. His new book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest. Get it from unknowncountry.com by going to the website and clicking on our Dreamland store, but get it because it's full of really valuable wisdom.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Gary David. Gary, before the break, we had begun our conversation about Masao, and I want to continue with that. But we also want to recognize that we're really working on two tracks here. We have the Hopi coming to Arizona from somewhere else. We have them meeting a teacher, Masao, who then begins to instruct them. And the primary issue or the primary teaching instruction that he provides has to do with the constellation Orion. So let's talk about how the Hopi came to Arizona and what beliefs they might have brought with them.
Okay. Well, the Hopi, they came from a lot of different directions. They made many migrations. One story about a couple different clans, the Water Clan and the Houseboat Clan, is that they came across the ocean on stepping stones, they called them, or islands, and they came from the west and landed on the shores of the west coast and went up the Colorado River and into the Grand Canyon, and then emerged from the Grand Canyon to the Colorado Plateau where the Hopi now live. So these desert dwellers were once great mariners, a very long time ago, and they have the myth of the transition from the third world to the fourth world. The third world was destroyed by a great flood, and they escaped on bamboo rafts. They escaped this flood and came to the fourth world, which is the current world that we all live in.
And see, that's such an interesting point you make there in itself, Gary, that they came over water on bamboo rafts, and then their creation mythology begins to involve the bamboo and the reed. So clearly they came from elsewhere. But one of the things I so enjoyed about your approach to this subject in the Orion Zone is that you're willing to go for a poetic interpretation here. And I think you even posed the question, what does it mean when the Hopi say they came across water? Is it possible that we're actually talking about stellar water here, that they in fact crossed the stars, the cosmic ocean, to come to Earth? What are your thoughts on that possibility?
Well, there are a couple different versions of the transition from the third world to the fourth world. The one that I just told you about, going across the ocean, but there's another myth that they tell, that they ascended from the third world, which is a subterranean world, through a large reed. And they came up through the reed and and the reed was sticking through the sky of the third world. And all the virtuous Hopis came up through the reed and came into the current world, the fourth world, and spread out and populated this world. So they have this idea of the reed and coming up through the reed. And it's interesting to note that the Hopi word for the Milky Way is Sangwuka.
Mm-hmm.
and that means the big reed. So they conceptualized the Milky Way as a big reed. So and put together with this myth of ascending from the third world to the fourth world through this reed. They might be trying to say that they came across the reed through the Milky Way and down to the Earth. So.
Exactly. I mean, that you certainly probably can't prove that, but it does open up a whole lot of territory for the imagination to explore. And then when you come in with this component here that they are focused on Orion, and we get the Egyptian myth, we get the Sumerian belief in beings, the Anunnaki, who have a connection with Orion as well, and we begin to develop this picture that this seafaring civilization is actually traveling the cosmic ocean, and were perhaps parked here long ago, and perhaps are even waiting for the return of they that left them here.
Well, let's get back to Masao, because this kind of plays in here. The figure of Masao, there's a picture of an artist's rendition of Masao in my book, and Masao has a large round eyes and a large round mouth, and he has a huge bald head, and it's a very large head, and they say it kind of resembles a squash or a summer squash, and the forehead bulges out in a ridge, and supposedly his feet are as long as a human forearm, and his body is rather thin and spindly, and his body is gray. In fact, the word mas in Hopi, the root of Masao, the word mas means gray. It actually means gray. So
we're doing a little math here, aren't we, Gary? We're adding this up. Star being, teacher, described as gray. His name means gray. Is he a gray?
Well, he certainly looks like a gray to me. And there are descriptions in the literature and in the oral tradition of what Masao looks like. And they all point to this figure that looks very much like a contemporary extraterrestrial gray.
And Gary, as we continue, I want to definitely get into the ant people. And in fact, I want to spend a couple of segments talking about the ant people. But just for the moment, can we introduce that component of the Hopi myth in relation to Masao? Who are the ant people?
The ant people, again, are play a part in their myth from one world to the other. There's 4 worlds have come and gone. Well, the fourth, we're still living at the end of the fourth world, but 3 worlds have been destroyed. The first world was destroyed by fire. It could be a volcanism or an asteroid strike. The second world was destroyed by ice, perhaps precipitated by a pole shift. And as I said the third world was destroyed by a great flood. Now, during the destruction of the first 2 worlds, the ant people gave the Hopi refuge in caves. The ant people, the Hopi were led to the ant people by the sky god named Sotuknang. And Sotuknang took them to the ant people where the ant people taught them how to survive in these caverns, in these subterranean places. And in fact, the kiva, which is a subterranean prayer chamber that many of the sacred ceremonies take place in, this is a representative of these caves that the ant people took the Hopi in to survive the 2 different cataclysms, the destruction of the first world by fire and the destruction of the second world by ice.
You note, Gary, that all across the American Southwest we find petroglyphs or rock carvings or pictographs, rock paintings that depict entities with spindly bodies, large eyes, and bulbous heads that sometimes project antennae, and that these eerie figures who may be the ant people, are frequently shown in a prayer stance. Are we equating, therefore, the ant people with the description of Masao? In other words, figures with large eyes, bulbous heads, possibly even gray?
This might be a variation. The ant people might be a variation of Masao.
Very interesting.
Like you said, I found a number of petroglyphs that depict these ant people, or perhaps Masao as well. One site in particular is kind of interesting. Just as an aside here, I found a Masonic open-air worship site next to a petroglyph site and a Hopi ruin site. This is near Winslow, Arizona, and it's the strangest thing I've ever seen. This a large amphitheater that was built in the late 20s and early 30s for the Masonic Lodge of Winslow, and there's concrete pillars that have fallen down, and there's a huge steel cross on top of this mesa. It's an isolated out in the middle of nowhere where the Masons went to worship, and it's the strangest thing. You have all these petroglyphs of the ant people, and you have a petroglyph, for instance, of a checkerboard, a perfect checkerboard, just like the floors of the Masonic lodges, and you just have to wonder why the Masons would set up right next to a Hopi ruin and a petroglyph site, and do their have their meetings in the open air there.
Gary, somebody knows something out there. There's no doubt about it, and they're purposefully using a lot of this ancient myth and legend. And when we get back from the break, I want to go further into these myths and legends of the ant people, and especially let's relate them to the Anunnaki of ancient Sumerian mythology. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
And this is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking with Gary in the subscriber section about just what the Hopi know about our future and what they expect to happen. His book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest, filled with fascinating and very, very carefully gathered Hopi wisdom about us, about who we are, about who they are, and where we are all going. The Orion Zone from Adventures Unlimited, and his great website, theorionzone.com. Don't miss it.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Gary David. Gary, in your book, The Orion Zone, which I highly recommend, I mean, we're an incredibly valuable resource you've put together there. Congratulations on the publication of it, by the way.
Thank you.
You note that the Hopi word for ant is Anu, and that in the same language, Naki means friend, prayer feathers, food offerings, or sand. And you call this a nexus of concepts pertaining to this insect that sometimes flies. And that in Sumeria, we have a combination of these two words, Anunnaki, which means ant friend, as a description of a group of beings who came to the earth from the heavens. How must you have felt when you made that connection between the Hopi beliefs and the beliefs of about the ancient Anunnaki, especially as documented by Zechariah Sitchin?
Well, it is quite a stunning coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidences, but when you have one...
Like a UFO, I've never seen one, right, yeah.
When you have one compounded upon another on another, you think, what's going on here? The Anunnaki, the ant friend, as I said, the ant people helped the Hopi survive during two cataclysms, and the word Anunnaki might have been a shared phrase that it came from Sumeria, ultimately, maybe transported by the Phoenicians here to the New World.
Yeah, right.
Right, yeah, and that's another whole realm, the Phoenix and the Phoenicians and so forth.
In Arizona, meaning land of the noble ones, Ari being the root of Aryan, noble, Zona, Arizona. I mean,
well, that's an interesting little coincidence too, a linguistic coincidence. The word zona, the Arizona was found on some Spanish maps and in the 1700s, and nobody really knew what it meant. You could be arid zone, I suppose. But the word zona was used by the Greek philosopher Aristotle and the Latin poet Ovid to mean the belt of Orion. So and you put that together with Ari, Orion and Aryan and so forth. Ari also means the hearth of God or the lion of God. It also refers to Jerusalem, in fact. So you put Arizona together, the belt of Orion, Zona is another strange linguistic coincidence that just leaves you shaking your head.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you compound this too, because I've been out in Arizona, I've done some poking around with some folks out there. Incredible stuff. I mean, you hear these amazing stories about 10 and 12-foot skeletons with long blonde hair or long red hair that are laid out on crystalline slabs hidden in caves near the Grand Canyon or in southern Utah. And you also hear these stories in New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, of Anunnaki sites that people are digging up ancient artifacts, cylinder seals, and things like this. You hear about farmers that are constantly digging stuff up in their land, and they're taking the gold artifacts they're finding and melting it down because they need the cash. Are you tapped into that network of people out there that are poking around in the Arizona area?
Well, yeah. In fact, Jack Andrews, he is writing a book about the lost city in the Grand Canyon. You might have heard about that.
Sure.
He's also the artist that did the cover art for my book. So he's
a phenomenal artist. He's a friend of mine too, by the way. I've worked with Jack for a number of years. He's outstanding.
So he's the expert in that particular. He's still putting together information for a book about the lost city in the Grand Canyon that supposedly had tunnels going back hundreds of feet and room for hundreds of people and a dining room and mummies along a wall. And this all came out in an article in 1909, April of 1909. And it was about a Smithsonian expedition that supposedly found this lost city right in the Grand Canyon, somewhere around where the Little Colorado comes into the Colorado River.
And it's this place where you have these strange Egyptian place names and Hindu place names, but nobody can really explain why.
Yeah, Thor's Ra's Tower, and there's all those very strange names out here, and maybe they were just using Egyptian names to try to evoke the grandeur of the place. But maybe there's a subtext there,
right?
That is pointing to the Egyptian civilization and their influence here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there were survivors of the cataclysm, these Nephilim, that decided not to leave the planet and return to Orion, but instead decided to settle in southwestern United States in what is now Hopi land and brought the Hopi there with them.
Well, the Hopi have kind of a strange view about where they originated. Some say they came up out of the Grand Canyon, near where this lost city is. They call it the Sipapuni, and it's an actual travertine dome in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and there are salt caves down there that pilgrimages are made to every year. But there's also some strange stories about the Hopi originating in the Middle East somewhere, or Egypt, or Jerusalem. You get these contradicting stories about, where they actually came from. They kind of outlandish that they come from the Middle East, but these stories still persist. And the elders.
Yeah, Frank Waters, who claimed he spent a number of years with the Hopi grandfathers, published a book on the Hopi. The Hopi don't like it, but in it he says that Masao and Moses might be the same guy.
Yeah. Well, the Messiah and Masao, the two names are pretty much the same.
And they fulfill the same function, so why couldn't they be the same? That's the question that I pose. I mean, it just seems to make so much sense that that's exactly what we're dealing with here.
Well, I think there was a lot more travel than the academics give credit for. There was a global mariner culture, and we got around the world a lot more than we think. The academics think we did. So.
Mm-hmm. A quote from Andrew Collins, a favorite Dreamland guest, says, "I have examined the Arizona-Orion ground-sky relationship, and I must say that I find this work intriguing. It is worth pursuing to very end." Graham Hancock has given you a lot of time and a lot of space on his forum to put forth your theory. Robert Bavall has commented on it. Gary, I mean, it's clear that you're onto something, that you're making a major contribution to this whole dialogue here. What are your thoughts then on how we begin to integrate this information? I mean, should we be like making a beeline out to the Grand Canyon and looking for these secrets, or how does it really begin to play in terms of changing or impacting each of our lives?
Well, I think you have to follow your own intuition and follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell says. Mm-hmm. And I came out here because I was intrigued by the land itself, and the ruined sites of the ancient ones. There's still a very vibrant ceremonial life going on right now as we speak on the Hopi reservation. In fact, the Hopi believe that they are the keepers of space. Whereas the Maya might have been the keepers of time, the Hopi could see themselves as the keepers of space, and their ceremonies actually keep the world in balance. If they stop doing their ceremonies, then the world will be thrown out of balance, and the fourth world will end. So it's a kind of precarious time, but many think that to live near the Hopi reservation is maybe a wise thing to do, and if there is, if we are indeed at the end times or the end of the fourth world, then perhaps if we can gather the wisdom of the Hopi people and see what they were trying to tell us, then we too can survive into the next into the fifth world.
I find it so fascinating that it said that if you went straight through the Hopi reservation to the other side of the world, you'd come out in Tibet. And the Tibetan word for sun is the Hopi word for moon, and the Hopi word for sun is the Tibetan word for moon.
Well, there are a lot of similarities. The Tibetans have a color symbology for each direction. And the Hopi do as well. So there's a lot of overlap in the philosophies. Frank Waters even said that the Hopi have a chakra system. He says that they had 5 chakras instead of the normal 7 that we think of today. But the Hopi also conceptualized the chakras. So there's a lot of overlap, and you have to wonder whether either the Hopi were in the old world or maybe the Tibetans traveled to this world, to the new world, to Arizona, to the.
Now you're talking. I mean, that's a question that I've posed too. I mean, what if it all started here on this continent, and then it went to Egypt, then it went to Samaria? I mean, we don't ever consider America as an ancient land, but what if thousands of years ago it all was here and then was exported to some of these other areas? I mean, it's a kind of a strange thing to contemplate, but it really makes you wonder if, in fact, the Hopi do have not just missing pieces to the puzzle, but they might actually have the keystone that really opens up the whole story.
Well, I think, it's possible that Atlantis might be right here in America. Mm-hmm. There are talk about Atlantis being in the Caribbean or around that area.
Right.
There's a Mayan archaeologist, one of the original, Laplangian. He had the theory that, the Maya was the root culture and it spread from the New World to Egypt and to Samaria and so forth.
There you go. Right.
So, we might have been the first here. So,
right. Gary, we're going to catch a break for a moment. When we come back, I want to talk with you about the ant people, and I want to ask you a question I've just been having in the back of my mind a long time, and I'm really thrilled to be able to ask someone about it, and that person's you. So this is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
And this is Whitley Strieber. I'm sure you are as thrilled as I am by this interview. I am so excited to be talking to Gary upcoming in the subscriber section. Gary's book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest from Adventures Unlimited. His website, The Orion Zone, filled with additional information. Do not miss it.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Gary David. Gary, one of my favorite TV shows is Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, great. One of my favorite episodes, and a lot of people's favorites, is it's called The Inner Light. And in this episode, the Enterprise is scanned by a probe from a planet. And it's a long-dead world. The sun had gone supernova. And when the ship is scanned, Captain Picard is targeted, and he's rendered unconscious by this probe. And during the 25 minutes that he's unconscious on the bridge, he lives a full lifetime in a simulated lifetime in this doomed world. And then he wakes up and realizes that he has spent in this 20 minutes this whole lifetime. Well, it turns out when I researched that episode that this plot comes from a Japanese folk tale. And in the Japanese tale, a man falls asleep under a tree, and he finds himself in a dream world in which he, too, like Picard, marries and has children and lives a whole lifetime in just a few minutes. And when he wakes up, he discovers that the kingdom he lived in the Japanese folktale, was a kingdom of ants living under the tree. The link in both these stories is living a simulated lifetime, living a lifetime in a dream state. Now, here's the question that I'm wanting to pose to you, Gary. We talked recently with John Lash, who wrote a book called Not in His Image, about the early Christian beliefs in the archons, or who he equates with the Greys. And he says that one of the key tools that the Greys have and use against us is simulation, virtual reality, in other words. And so here we have this strange link, and I'm trying to get through this. What could be the connection with the ant people and this idea of virtual reality? Did the Hopi ever leave any indication that we are living in a dream or living in a virtual world?
By the way, that's one of my favorite Star Trek episodes as well. That's a great episode that you mentioned. But the Hopi, I would say no on that point. The Hopi are pragmatists. They're rationalists, and they don't really go in for the hallucinatory practices such as some of the other tribes, like the Yaqui, the peyote eaters, and so forth. The Hopi are a different bunch of. They're kind of like an island in the middle of tribes that like to. I mentioned the sun dance before. That's definitely a consciousness transforming event. If you've ever heard about it or seen the sun dance, it's very painful, very torturous, and it's a kind of a breakthrough in consciousness. Well, the Hopi are a different kind of a tribe. Their whole raison d'etre is to perform the ceremonies as best they can, as faithfully as they can, and to keep the world in balance. So the anthropologist Ruth Benedict put it this way. She said that the Pueblo people, which includes the Hopi, they're kind of like Apollo. They're Apollonian, whereas many of the other tribes, such as the Yaqui and those that experiment with different hallucinogenics, they are the Dionysian kind of tribes. They are the consciousness breakers. But the Hopi, I would say, they patiently tend their corn and patiently do the ceremonies as best they can to keep the world kind of so it won't go off and spin off into space. I mean, they're pragmatists, basically.
Speaking of spinning off into space, while they are pragmatic, they also talk about stargates and portals. Let's talk about what the Hopi have to say about these dimensional portals or sky holes, as they're described.
Well, the Hopi, as I said before, that the Hopi believe that they came through the reed, which is a portal itself, through the big reed, the Milky Way, perhaps from the center of the galaxy. They worship Orion and the Belt of Orion, and the Belt of Orion synchronizes many of the ceremonies that take place. When they're down in the Kiva, there's an overhead hatchway, that they go in and out of the Kiva from. And when Orion comes into the hatchway and shines down into the Kiva, then the ceremony, especially the winter solstice ceremony, the Soyal ceremony, it's called. Then that ceremony begins. So they synchronize their ceremonial life by the stars.
And this, again, is another of that important point of correspondence that they share with Egypt, and specifically with what we're starting to develop as the picture around the Great Pyramid. What do you think the Great Pyramid was, Gary? Or is, excuse me.
Well, I think it's an archaeoastronomical structure, definitely. It's been proven that, as you said in the introduction, that many of the stars, the shafts point to these stars in the constellation Orion and also Sirius. And I think the Great Pyramid was definitely not just a tomb, but it was a model for transcendence into the next life. It was a place to transcend. Really, the Hopi and the Egyptians and the Maya all have this idea of transcendence through a pyramid. Now, the Hopi weren't pyramid builders per se, but they took natural mesas and they sanctified these mesas by building sacred cities on these mesas. So they're using the mesas in the same way that the Egyptians used the pyramids and the Maya used the pyramids.
Gary, we talk a lot about cargo cults on Dreamland, and as you're saying this, it suggests to me that the Hopi either didn't know what they were doing and they're simply copying or mimicking something they had seen, or they had full consciousness, full awareness of what they were doing, and they were intentionally making these alignments and locating their sacred sites and cities so that it corresponded with what was going on in the heavens. Which do you think it was?
Well, I think as far as the Orion correlation, I found that it's a global phenomenon. Mm-hmm. So they obviously were influenced by other cultures. A colleague of mine, Crichton Miller, claims that the Hopi and the Maya and the Egyptians all used the Celtic cross to make these to set up and align these structures. And you see the Maya version of the Celtic cross, and the Hopi also have an artifact called the Monko. It's an artifact that used by the chief Kachinas and the elders, and it looks a lot like a cross, and so there's a commonality in all these cultures, and I think this may have been a vestige of an instrument that they used to construct this Orion correlation in Arizona. But I think as well, Masao directed them to a great degree and told them where to place these cities. So Masao had a big hand in determining where the actual coordinates for the villages would be in order to achieve this Orion correlation.
And so now we're sitting here on the edge of prophecy, and I know Whitley's going to talk with you about this in much more detail. Do the Hopi tell us then that Masao is going to return, and how do they describe, or how will they know when Masao has returned?
Well, some say that Masao will return at the end. Others say that a figure called Pahana will return. Pahana was there at the beginning during when the Hopi first set out on their centuries-long migrations across the southwestern desert. The Hopi would build at a certain spot and then abandon that spot and move on to another place. And Pahana was there right at the beginning, and Pahana then left, went back east, and left them. And Pahana is kind of like Quetzalcoatl for the Aztecs, or Kukulkan for the Maya, the plumed serpent figure of a figure that teaches them and then leaves and is prophesied to return at the end of the age.
The end of the age, and here we are at the end of our time together too. So perfect synchronicity, Gary. I really want to thank you and deeply appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. This material is absolutely phenomenal. I hope everybody's going to go get a copy of the Orion Zone and step into this ancient star lore. So once again, Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you, William.
Now it's my turn, and I am very eager to talk with you. We're going to have a lot of fun. I've got a lot of questions about just where we are all going, and I think that Gary's got some answers that are totally new and unexpected to those of us who do not have inside information about what the Hopi are thinking about our future. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. You're about to experience something that you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts the others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week, she is reporting on a very serious extinction event that is unfolding right now. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you, Whitley. In the past few weeks, I have interviewed scientists who are alarmed that global warming could destroy the Amazon and other rainforests and devastate the biodiversity of plants around the world. In Svalbard, Norway, construction begins in March to build a Noah's Ark to preserve the Earth's plants in a seed bank built inside an Arctic mountain. In the oceans, corals and much marine life are threatened with extinctions. On land, millions and millions of honeybees that pollinate so many of the fruits, vegetables, nuts, and melons that we expect in supermarkets have been disappearing in the United States, Spain, and Poland, and amphibians around the planet are dying out at an alarming rate. In the 20th century, there were about 6,000 species of amphibians. Today, in 2007, nearly half are in serious decline. 1/3 are threatened, and an estimated 122 species have become extinct since 1980. Amphibian species were around when dinosaurs dominated Earth, and amphibian species survived that asteroid catastrophe 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs. But amphibians now are not surviving what industrialized human civilization is doing to this planet. Amphibians, like honeybees, are considered to be like canaries in coal mines that warn the miners when there is not enough oxygen to breathe. How do the canaries warn? By dying. Many zoologists and other scientists now realize that the amphibians, with their very permeable skins, are so sensitive to their environment that it's a serious question in this modern world about how many can survive in the wild. If amphibians are being forced out of the world environment, what's going with them is one of the biggest potential medical chests in nature. For example, the skin of the Ecuadorian tricolor frog produces a pain reliever that is more powerful than morphine without any addictive side effects. The secretions from the Peruvian giant monkey frog are used to treat seizures and depression. The Australian red-eyed tree frog skin secretes peptides that can disable HIV infection. Recently, scientists from around the world met in Atlanta, Georgia, to launch what they are calling an amphibian ark in an effort to save thousands of frogs, toads, and salamander species threatened by fungi, pathogens, increasing UV radiation, and rapidly changing habitats in the face of global warming. The idea originated with the Conservation Breeding Specialist Group of the World Conservation Union. The goal for the amphibian ark is to have zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens around the planet construct biosecure facilities to preserve at least 500 each of nearly 2,000 endangered amphibian species, and especially frogs. After amphibians are collected for the amphibian arks, they would have to be cleaned up from damaging fungi. And raising funds for such an international effort is linked to an upcoming global publicity campaign that will designate 2008 as the year of the frog. One of the world's leading amphibian researchers is Andrew Blaustein, Ph.D. and Director of the Environmental Sciences Graduate Program at Oregon State University in Corvallis. I asked Professor Blaustein why scientists are now saying it is urgent to build amphibian arks around the world.
Well, it seems like we're at a desperate point right now. We have a major extinction event on the planet. Extinctions are natural processes, but the rate at which extinctions are occurring across the planet in almost all taxonomic groups, different types of organisms, from plants to microorganisms to big mammals to frogs, is unprecedented. At this point, we're losing species at such rates that we're so desperate that we're trying to do everything we can to preserve some of these great species, such as amphibians, and many of those species are frogs.
Could even the amphibian ark be too late?
For some of the species, it's going to be probably too late. For example, the golden toad, which used to be really common in Costa Rica, they're gone. In modern times, there were about 5,700 species of amphibians, maybe 6,000, okay? It is estimated that 43% of those species have populations declining. 32% of them are threatened. 168 are presumably extinct. How's that? About 122 probably became extinct since 1980. So you're talking about 6,000 species. 43% are declining. 32% are threatened. 122 have become extinct since 1980. And this is worse than birds and mammals. Amphibians are hit harder than birds or mammals. Like dinosaurs, they're gone.
What do you think is causing these die-offs of amphibians around the world?
Well, I've always said that there are multiple causes for amphibian extinctions, and I'll name a few of them. Habitat destruction, habitat alteration is obviously one of the major causes. There are different types of pathogens. There's this fungus called the chytrid fungus, but there are also water molds, such as saprolegnia. There are viruses. There are bacteria. Then there are also climate change problems, increasing temperature, global warming. There's ozone depletion and UV radiation. And, of course, there's pollution, contamination. There are introduced exotic species. The bullfrogs were introduced to the western United States. They're not native, and they're eating and competing with native western species. So there's all these things going on.
What is worst case if the amphibians continue to go extinct?
If you took amphibians away from the planet tomorrow, you would see a very big change in ecosystems. Amphibians are really important predators. They eat billions and billions of insect pests per year, and they eat other things too. They'll eat vertebrates, they'll eat snakes, they eat fish, some of them eat birds. But you would notice great increase in mosquitoes and, or flies, things like that. They carry a lot of diseases that humans get. Also, lots of things eat amphibians. There are lots of fishes that eat them. Birds eat them. Mammals eat them. So the ecosystem would be drastically changed. As a matter of fact, some ecosystems, such as in the northeastern forests of the United States, the amphibians sometimes comprise the largest group of vertebrates. There are more amphibians, if you weight them, added up, than there are birds or mammals, for example. So they can be really important.
What do you see this amphibian ark project doing?
Well, from what I can gather, the amphibian ark, we're just going to try to get as many of these amphibians. Most of them, I think, that they're talking about are from Central America area, and try to propagate them in captivity with, obviously, the expectation to release them later on back into the field after we figure out what's going on down there. But it's going to be difficult because they're really not that easy to keep and breed in captivity. We don't know all the habits of these amphibians. We don't exactly know what they all eat or what they all need. I mean, there are some great exhibits. For example, I saw a great exhibit at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City a couple of years ago where they had these exotic species from Central America, and they're doing a great job. But to them to actually breed in captivity and to get their numbers increased, it's going to take great effort.
What about your research on increased UV light because of thinning ozone? Do you think that that is playing any role in the extinctions of amphibians?
Well, we think UV light is just one of the 5 or 6 reasons why amphibian populations are crashing. And one of the things that UV does, and we didn't know this when we first started what was going on, there seems to be UV hits a living system such as an amphibian, a fish, or a person. It hampers their immune systems. And when it hampers the immune system, the animal or the person or whatever we're talking about cannot cope with pathogens, with diseases. We think there's a relationship here that habitat destruction that causes stress or ozone depletion that causes more UV radiation actually hampers the immune system of these animals, and then they get diseases more easily. I don't think it's just, for example, a pathogen moves in and starts to wreak havoc. I think some environmental change induces some other changes where the pathogen gets to go rampant.
So what you mean is that the fungus spreading is opportunistic on weakened immune systems.
That's what I'm thinking. Now, I may be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking, and that's what a lot of my colleagues think.
And that's exactly what seems to be emerging in this mysterious and huge disappearance of honeybees that's now affecting the United States, Spain, and Poland. They're finding a lot of fungus inside of the few bodies they've been able to find and do necropsies on. For the most part, they don't even have the bees. The question has been, why would fungus all of a sudden be killing off millions and millions of bees in the United States, Spain, and Poland?
Well, we think that would be another case of some kind of environmental change occurring or some type of stress due to environmental change that causes these fungi to be opportunistic and to knock off some of these natural populations of amphibians and bees and whatever.
And Professor Blaustein, what kind of future would we have if the honeybees die out and the amphibians die out?
Well, I'm not a honeybee expert, but I'll tell you this. I've been hearing about this. You know, we're not just losing honeybees here, but honeybees, I mean, they're incredible pollinators. They're really important. The frogs disappeared. I already told you there would be unbelievable ecosystem damage. We have a lot of species that are disappearing that are going to influence how ecosystems function in the future. I mean, we're losing native earthworms because of exotic species of earthworms that have been introduced. It's already changed soil. I mean, this can obviously, if you change the soil, you're going to change what grows in the soil.
And what you mean is that the Earth is changing right now so rapidly, and extinctions are the product of all of these changes, like dominoes falling. What is worst case from your point of view?
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, fact of the matter is I can't tell what's going to happen in the future, but we could make some predictions. As a matter of fact, I have a colleague who works with me. His name is Josh Lawler. He's going to be at the University of Washington in a few months as a new professor there. And we have modeled some of the things that would happen if certain climate changes occurred. For example, if there were increased temperatures or different moisture regimes. And what you would see, the way we modeled this, is that you will see shifts in the range of species. You will see some species that become more northern. Some of the southern species will move up. When you get extinctions or if you get climate change, like from global warming, you will get species in new areas that weren't there before. So if the climate warms up in North America, we're already seeing this. We're expecting animals and plants and things that fly to move up north. And they may bring new pests with them or new diseases. We're already seeing an increase in malaria. We're already seeing increases in animals that cause dengue fever. We're seeing tropical diseases going into North America right now.
The projection for sea level rise, which could be up in the UN's worst case, up to maybe 4 or 5 feet in the next 90 years, means that a lot of coastal populations of humans are going to have to move away from the coast. If you combine the extinction rates of amphibians, the extinction rates of honeybees, the extinction rates of plants, and you overlay that over what is going to happen to human populations and human food needs, that we are going to have some kind of a major food challenge, aren't we?
Well, we already have major problems now with population problems. I've seen some of the scenarios for the melting of the polar caps and all that, and I've seen the temperature rising and what it would do to coastal regions. And, you know, my home area of New York would be underwater and lots of Florida. But the fact is, you have to make the public aware of some of these problems. Global climate change is a fact. 95% probably of the scientists who study the phenomenon agree, but you just got to make the politicians and the public aware of all this. We're looking at massive extinctions of many species. We have a major biodiversity crisis where animals and plants and microorganisms are declining at unprecedented rates. We have climate change that's helping this out. And we have a lot of problems here. We have increasing populations. So, I mean, I don't even want to predict what's going to be in 90 years. It's a scary situation.
And do you think that the Noah's Ark ideas could make a difference?
I think it's possible. It's going to be really difficult. As I said, it's like a desperation move where you have to take all these animals from their native habitats and try to rear them in captivity, propagate them, and release them. There are some success stories to doing this, you know. For example, American bison almost went extinct the early part of the century, but there were a few remnant individuals around, and they made populations were made in captivity so that they could reintroduce them. We tried to do this with the California condor. Amphibians might be a little tougher because we don't know a lot about them. They're a little more difficult in captivity. But it's what we have to do. That's about it. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's a desperation move. I'm talking about a group of animals, the amphibians, that were around when the dinosaurs were around. They were around before the dinosaurs. Now they're starting to get hit. They survived all that stuff, and now they're going down the tubes.
The amphibians were there when the dinosaurs were there.
They made it. They made it, and now they're not making it anymore. They're hurting.
In 2007, What kind of work will you be doing and others doing trying to save amphibians?
Well, what I'm doing right now is working on some diseases. I'm working on that chytrid fungus, and I'm working on saprolignia, which is a type of water mold. These are two types of diseases that have hit amphibians where I live in the Pacific Northwest. They're also global. They're all over the world. We don't exactly understand everything about the chytrid fungus. We don't know where it came from and why it's starting to be so prevalent all over. We do know that the other disease I'm looking at has been around for a long time, and a lot of it has come in from stocked fishes, transfers from fishes to amphibians. So what we're trying to do is look at the chytrid fungus in more detail to see whether or not there are some environmental changes that have triggered the chytrid fungus to break out. Interestingly enough, some types of animals are more susceptible than others. Bullfrogs seem to be carriers of the fungus, but they don't seem to get sick, and they seem to be spreading it.
And what do you think is the answer to that?
Well, they have some type of immune system that doesn't let them get sick, but they're carrying it around, and we've done experiments in my lab that show that they can give it to other species.
And is there anything about the bullfrog that might then be extracted, synthesized, multiplied?
Good point. Lots of animals have some types of peptides that allow them to cope with different types of pathogens, and bullfrogs may have some of these. Some people have isolated peptides that knock off pathogens from herpes all the way to the chytrid fungus, and people are looking at that. So that's going to be a possibility down the road.
How would you distribute medicine to the wild amphibian world if you could come up with something from a bullfrog that might fight off the fungus?
Good question. I don't really know how you do that. I don't know how you do it in the field. And amphibians, as you said, are like canaries in a coal mine. If something is hitting amphibians, other organisms, including people, will be affected eventually by some of these same factors. So we're really looking at these as model systems to study disease spread and the effects of environmental change. It's not just an amphibian problem here. It's a major problem for people.
The whole world.
Yeah.
Even the American Astronomical Society is focusing on what's happening to Earth life and potential extinction events from outer space. They've invited Professor Blaustein to speak at their upcoming May 2007 meeting in Honolulu, Hawaii. Astronomers and astrophysicists are planning a special session with geologists and Professor Blaustein and others, and here is a quote from the AAS about what this session will be focused upon. Quote, "The reality of bolide impacts as a significant effect on the terrestrial environment is a real possibility, but radiation effects are not generally considered. However, radiation events are expected over geological timescales and have been shown to have potentially strong effects on the terrestrial environment. Such events might include nearby supernovae, gamma ray bursts, and unusually large solar flares. While there is new interest in climate change in the geological and paleontological community, there is increasing evidence for strong coupling to astrophysical causes. Confirmation of the abundance of extrasolar planets has created new interest in the possible distribution of habitable planets," unquote. Professor Andrew Blaustein is one of the few on the planet who has gathered substantial data about increased UV radiation on Earth caused by thinning ozone and the link between that increased radiation and damage to immune systems in amphibians. Whitley, when the AAS, the Astronomical Society, holds a special session bringing in Professor Andrew Blaustein, who is focused on the extinction rates of amphibians, it makes me wonder, the astronomical scientists must also be worrying about astronomical events that could cause a radiation on this planet that could also affect Earth life and extinctions.
Well, Linda, you know that has happened before. 41,000 years ago, all of the large animals in Australia abruptly, in a matter of just very suddenly were destroyed, and almost certainly this was by radiation from a supernova. And so it does happen. And in fact, if you look at the galaxy, you find that this is one of the characteristics of all big stellar systems, is these bursts of gamma rays floating around. And in addition to that, we're coming up on what's probably going to be the most active solar cycle in history, meaning that there could be extraordinary solar flares. So it's time. I think it just seems to be one of those times that the Earth goes through periodically when there are a lot of extinctions, and we are going to have to be prepared. How do we get past it? Well, you know, in the past, there have been events, ice ages and gamma ray bursts and great earthquakes and so forth, and mankind has survived because we have the edge of intelligence, and we're going to need to use that again. Thank you very much, Linda, for a great report. And folks, you don't hear these things elsewhere. Remember, Dreamland is where you hear reports like this. The general media is not telling you these things, but these are the things you need to know for your life and for your children's life. How to survive. Be prepared. That is the best way to do it, and this is the best place to be to find
Kachina or the owl Kachina or and so forth. But then you have these bizarre creatures that you really can't describe, and they put on these dances, and they dance all day long in the middle of the plaza, the village plaza, and there might be 25 or maybe 50 dancers, and they dance all day long in the desert sun, and it's kind of an endurance test, really, and honoring these spirit messengers.
And so you're watching this. Sometimes you're out in the middle of the day. Other times at night, it's mesmerizing. You're watching Orion rise after sunset, and you're just kind of being taken into this incredible world of the Hopi. At what point did you then make the connection between what the Hopi are saying in some of their traditions and what Bavall and Hancock and also Adrian Gilbert had dug up in Egypt?
Well, I was driving up to the Hopi mesas. I live about 4 hours from them. And as you say, I had just read the Orion Mystery. This was back in 1997. And I was gazing up towards the three primary mesas that the Hopi have settled on. They're first, second, and third mesas, they call them, and they're fairly large mesas. They're not small buttes or anything. They're large promontories, and the Hopi settled upon these mesas about 1100 A.D. That's when most archaeologists believe that the villages began to take shape up on the mesas, on top of the mesas, and also up at the base of the mesas. Now, the mesas are laid out from east to west, and they're about 7 miles apart and in a row. And, as I said, I had just finished reading the Orion Mystery, and I thought, well, these three mesas right in a row, maybe there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And so I kind of put that in the back of my mind, and later on, when I got home, I got out my sky chart and got out my map and compared the two, and I found that there was either a Hopi village or a Hopi room. Well, I've been living in Arizona for about 12 years. Before that time, as you said, I lived in South Dakota and studied the Lakota Sioux and studied their rituals and cosmology, and also participated in some sweat lodges and witnessed the sun dance up there. And I also taught English on the Pine Ridge Reservation. But it was time to move after about 15 years in the Dakotas. And I became fascinated with the Southwest during a trip down this way. And I just got involved with going to ruin sites and just seeing how different the Hopi and the Anasazi, or the Kizatsanom, as the Hopi like to call them, ancient ones, how different they are from the Lakota, the more nomadic tribes of the plains. And I started going to different ruin sites and going up to the Hopi reservation and going to Kachina dances. The Kachina dances are held annually from about late April until just after the summer solstice. In July, the Kachina season finishes. And I started going to a number of these dances and witnessing the dances. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. They're so hard to describe because there's so many variations of the Kachinas. The Kachinas are basically spirit messengers. They're not gods per se, but they're intercessors between humans and the gods. And the Hopi have dances to honor these Kachinas, and they wear different sorts of masks and varying types. They're round masks, and some are cylindrical, and there are different feathers, and
they almost look like robots, or like they're wearing some kind of a spacesuit or something. Not to diminish
they do look like helmets. Some of the masks are especially the cylindrical masks. They look like some sort of helmet. There's no other way to put it. There are Kachinas that are more naturalistic, such as, like the woolen, corresponding to every major star in the constellation, Orion. So, and
the map you have in your book is utterly compelling, Gary, where you lay out the Anasazi star cities, as you refer to them, side by side beside Orion. And you're right, it is virtually a perfect match, where the Hopi mesas and the sites of their sacred sites are mirroring Orion on the ground.
And it's just uncanny in the perfection of the reflection of sky mirroring the Earth, Earth mirroring as above, so below. I was floored by that.
And you mentioned one of the things that you discovered is that there was an instructor or a mediator or perhaps an overseer who was assisting the Hopi in the creation of this layout. This is I'm referring to the Hopi god, the Hopi instructor Massa. Let's talk for a moment about who Massa was to the Hopi and how he influenced this story.
Masao is a very important god for the Hopi. He's also represented as a Kachina, but he's basically a god. He's the god of the underworld, death, and this earth plane. So he kind of is the similar to Osiris in Egypt. He plays a similar role as being god of the underworld. The Hopi have a cosmology that is rather similar to the Egyptian one, in that they have an active relationship with the underworld. For instance, when people are doing the winter solstice ceremony on the Earth, the spirits in the underworld are doing the summer solstice ceremony, and so there's a reciprocity there that is really kind of unique, I think. But it is similar to the Egyptians too. Their concept of the Duwat or the Tuwat.
Mm-hmm.
But
Gary, we're going to catch a quick break right now, Gary. When we come back, we'll return to our conversation about Masao, and then let's also talk about the connection with literal beings from Orion, both in ancient Egypt and in Arizona. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
And this is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking in just a few minutes with Gary for our subscribers, and we are going to be talking about what the Hopi are saying and believe about the coming times and the coming Earth changes. His website is a wonderful website, the Orion Zone. His new book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest. Get it from unknowncountry.com by going to the website and clicking on our Dreamland store, but get it because it's full of really valuable wisdom.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Gary David. Gary, before the break, we had begun our conversation about Nassau, and I want to continue with that. But we also want to recognize that we're really working on two tracks here. We have the Hopi coming to Arizona from somewhere else. We have them meeting a teacher, Masao, who then begins to instruct them. And the primary issue or the primary teaching instruction that he provides has to do with the constellation Orion. So let's talk about how the Hopi came to Arizona and what beliefs they might have brought with them.
Okay. Well, the Hopi, they came from a lot of different directions. They made many migrations. One story about a couple different clans, the Water Clan and the Houseboat Clan, is that they came across the ocean on stepping stones, they called them, or islands, and they came from the west and landed on the shores of the west coast and went up the Colorado River and into the Grand Canyon, and then emerged from the Grand Canyon to the Colorado Plateau where the Hopi now live. So these desert dwellers were once great mariners, a very long time ago, and they have the myth of the transition from the third world to the fourth world. The third world was destroyed by a great flood, and they escaped on bamboo rafts. They escaped this flood and came to the fourth world, which is the current world that we all live in.
And see, that's such an interesting point you make there in itself, Gary, that they came opening incredible star knowledge. In a 1994 book, The Orion Mystery, Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert claimed that the shafts of the Great Pyramid were pointed directly at key stars in the constellation Orion in a way that reflected the configuration of Orion in ancient times. Orion is the great hunter of the night sky, and the three belt stars of Orion are easily recognized by nearly everyone living on this planet. But what's Orion's story? Using astronomical data about stellar movement, Bauval and Gilbert contended that the Orion stars correspond precisely to the pyramid's position in approximately 10,400 BC. This period was called by the Egyptians the first time when the god Osiris ruled the earth. According to Bauval, the positions of the Giza pyramids on the ground are a reflection of the positions of the stars in Orion. In Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock draws attention to the fact that the entire Giza Plateau and the Nile River were representations of the constellation of Orion and the Milky Way, respectively. It seems that after the flood and their expulsion from the earth, the Nephilim left the Sphinx, pyramids, and Nile River as markers indicating their whereabouts in the heavens. Building on Bauval and Hancock in his book, The Orion Zone, researcher Gary David takes us to Arizona and shows that the constellation of Orion was projected upon the deserts there, too. Orion provides the template, he says, by which the Anasazi, the ancestral Hopi, determined the locations of their villages and sacred sites during a migration period across the southwest of the U.S. that lasted centuries. Spiritually mandated by a god the Hopi called Masa, this earthly Orion closely mirrors its celestial counterpart, with prehistoric cities corresponding to all the major stars in the constellation. Gary's also going to discuss with us the possibility of extraterrestrial contact among the Hopi. Gary, welcome to Dreamland.
Thank you, William.
It's a real pleasure to have you, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. I know you don't do very many interviews and that you're very conscientious of the Hopi and sensitive to their religious beliefs. So, once again, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
You've embarked on an astounding project, I think, to map the stars on the ground in Arizona. How does an English professor from the Dakotas suddenly find himself in Arizona decoding ancient rock art?